The best books are those that tell you what you know already.
Welcome to AMI Audiobook Review, the weekly podcast where we talk all things audiobooks with myself, Ramya and Jacob Szymanski.
Hello.
Enter Jacob. Hello. And technical producer Nisreen Abdelmajid is actually not with us for the next few weeks. She's hanging out post-wedding, having a good time.
That's fine. We'll give her a break this time.
We will. Yeah, for the next couple episodes. And then she better be back in gung-ho.
Better than ever.
Yeah, 50 books in, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, right. Anyways, do we sound different today, Jacob? Because we're not together as we usually are in Studio 5 at AMI headquarters.
I don't know. I guess that remains to be seen.
Oh, or heard. Maybe we'll get some feedback from listeners. Why do you guys sound like this week? Anyways.
They will let us know / complain about it.
Yeah. But don't, guys, because, I said to Jacob, playing to our insecurities out here. This is just what it is. The quote of the week is from 1984 by George Orwell. Any reason why you picked this one?
Since we're going to be talking about banned books a little later in the episode, George Orwell, 1984 by George Orwell was obviously something that was banned quite a bit. Now, I know that sounds like a surprise to you because it's required reading in a bunch of schools, and it's not that controversial, but in China, you better believe that book is banned to hell because it must be pretty eerie to be in a surveillance state like they are over there in China and be able to read this book. So that's why I picked it.
Yep, exactly. And we're going to get into that banned book week as well as censorship and all of that later. But we are first going to get into another fabulous book club question that we came up with. We're so good at coming up with these questions, mostly Jacob. And it has to do with what makes a great read for us, our enjoyment of a read and what that means. There's some rating involved and lots of great responses this time around too. And as I said, book banning, censorship, that's later on. But first, let's talk about what's on the CELA homepage. This is the Center for Equitable Library Access, which, by the way, if you've been following the show for 3-ish seasons, then you'd think that we're talking to CELA today, the first episode of the month, but we've pushed them forward to next week. So that's just a programming note. Here are the 3 titles on the homepage at celalibrary.ca. 19 Steps by Millie Bobby Brown. And I didn't know Millie Bobby Brown was writing, so that's where I'm at with that one.
She is now.
Yeah. Doppelganger by Naomi Klein and Reykjavik, a crime story by Ragnar Jonasson. Okay, so these are the 3 titles up there that you can check out. And of course, their catalog is just packed with audiobooks of all kinds. And they have different categories there you can search by, keyword search, all kinds of ways that you can get into your audiobook listening.
Right. And I think this is something we don't say often enough, is that CELA is available freely to anyone who's a CNIB member in Canada. And what is this? What it essentially is a free library. You can get books in all sorts of alternative formats, totally free. And the website is fantastic. They have a huge catalog, especially popular books. They're more likely than not going to be available in audiobook format, even Braille, and accessible text formats.
Exactly. Printability, it's easy as sending them your proof of CNIB and being able to get right onto the access. I use the Dolphin Easy Reader app with CELA, with the CELA catalog. Do you use that as well or something else?
Yeah, I've heard that one works great. I use VoiceStream Reader, which I bought back in the day, but I think it's gone up quite a bit in price and apparently has moved to a subscription model, which gives me the icks a little bit. But because I bought it before they made the switch, I can still use it freely.
You got grandfathered in?
Yeah, I got grandfathered in, exactly. And the thing I love about it is, you're going to appreciate this, Rams, is you can adjust the playback rate very precisely. You don't just get 1.1 or 1.2 or 1.3. So nice. You can do 1.23, 1.24. Because sometimes it's too fast and then you bring it down one notch and then it's too slow.
It's too
you
slow.
Want it right in between.
Right? Okay, see, I'm telling you, you're on my level with this conversation. That's why I love the Audible player, which, by the way, you pointed this out a while back to me and I've been noticing it ever since. It's taking forever for Audible to load up these days. Forever. Yeah. I'm waiting upwards of 15 seconds for the Audible app to open. So if you guys are listening, Audible, please help and fix that. But
Yeah,
anyway,
it's an absolute behemoth of an app. I
it
don't know
is.
why. I don't know what's going on in
What
the
are we
background.
waiting
It's
on?
crazy.
My goodness. Anyway, I need to get to my audiobooks now. But also the Dolphin Easy Reader app, the playback speed settings are not at all precise. You go from like 1 to 1.25
Yeah,
to
no, that's not
1.5 to
enough options.
1.75.
That's not enough options. It's
No,
super frustrating. Like,
it
guys,
is.
it sounds super nitpicky. It can really make or break a book. I
It
swear to God.
makes or breaks. I want my audiobook just under 10 hours, but not from 12 hours to 8, right? So, all right. So, we have things we want to get to. In the last episode we talked about ranking elements of a book for personal personal enjoyment, right? And preference. And that I think spun into this like formal question that we put out to the book club. Here are the 4 elements that you brought up, Jacob: plot, writing, setting, characters. And we're no way trying to influence your decision with the way that we put these. You can just put it in whatever order you want. So we're elaborating on this because obviously the topic is very deep, and it can go anywhere and everywhere. Some people had some very deep thoughts on this, myself included. I actually wrote down exactly what I want to read, and other people are like, this is the obvious answer. So the question to the book club, I'm going to read it out the way we sent it out. Rank the following 4 book elements in order of personal importance in regards to your enjoyment of a book: setting, plot, writing, characters. In other words, based on your personal reading preferences, rank these from most to least important and describe your thought process behind your ranking and why you value certain elements over others.
And this is a question for the book club, but it's obviously for us too, Rams, because
Yep.
I want to know where you stand on this. Because listen, I know your reading preferences a little bit, but I have no clue what you're going to say. So, how about you start us off with this and give us your personal ranking?
Okay. All right. Here we go. So this is my response. I wrote it down nice and clean because I thought I might as well get nicely into it. Yeah, I know. It's the most prep I've ever done. Okay,
We
ready?
appreciate it. We appreciate it.
Thanks. Okay, here's what I said: writing, characters, plot, setting. That's most to least. Okay, so if the writing is less than absolutely engaging, then I'm not engaging in the book. I'm not a completionist, so I don't have a problem dropping a book that's written poorly. It has amateur writing styles or just doesn't live up to my expectations of what clean, thoughtful writing is. Writing is honestly what anchors the rest of these elements for my enjoyment.
Hmm.
Write me into the lives and personalities of the characters. Write me a believable plot that I can follow the characters on, and write the dimensions of a vivid setting that I can immerse myself into. There's a very crucial trust building that connects the author and reader together through the experience, and a trust that commits us to the journey. That trust only happens through the language, aka the writing. And then I put deep, right? So, should we
Okay,
get into the examples, or you want to go first?
setting last. I'd like to unpack this. A lot of people seem to be putting setting last, and I,
Is it because we think of it as a given?
yeah, yeah, I think I agree. But you put writing first,
Yes.
right?
That
I
doesn't
don't
surprise
think.
you, does it? I've talked about writing as the only reason why Addie LaRue was the best book ever. I have been very clear about my stance on writing. Maybe writing as like such an important aspect might be a bit more.
I don't feel like it's a game breaker for me. Like,
Really?
I don't, it's not that I need the writing to be a 10 out of 10. It's that it better be better than a 5 out of 10.
Oh
Right?
God, if it's a 5 out of 10, forget it. I'm not even going to pick up this book.
Right. But if the writing is adequate, I can still absolutely love a book.
What does
Right?
adequate mean to you, though?
Adequate is passable. It's like
Oh
a burger
no,
from
I can't. I'm
McDonald's. It's not
cringing.
good,
No.
but like you still
It's
like
only
it,
good when you're drinking a little. Okay, passable writing or adequate writing can only carry so much. And as I said, okay, we have actually heard from many people, including yourself, Jacob, who are very much identify as completionists. Like you guys will
Mhm.
pick up books and have to read through them no matter what. So I think that's why you're willing to lower the bar a little bit. Are we starting the psychoanalyzing early on this episode? You're willing to like lower the bar on writing. Whereas for me, I never feel the obligation to finish a book ever. And I'm so upfront about that. So
Well, there's nothing wrong with that. Like, it's your
yeah,
time. You can do whatever the hell you
exactly.
want with it. Like, you don't
Hmm.
owe the authors anything. If a book isn't doing it for you, then that's not an issue at all. I'm a completionist because it's like, I don't know, it's just I don't know if you want to unpack this or not.
Mm-mm.
I don't know. I just don't want to leave things unfinished. It leaves me unsatisfied. I feel like I cannot put a judgment on a book unless I read all the way through it.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, if you're already willing to kind of put up with whatever to get through a book, then I think that automatically comes with lowering your expectations on, or finding other things to focus on to kind of get you through the book, right? Because we're not going to, oh god, this book is trash, however I must continue reading. It's very not like any of us, or it's not
No, I
human nature.
don't blame anyone for not
Hmm.
finishing books. Like, that's fine.
Yes.
We have
Yeah.
long, busy lives, and dedicating 8 to 40 hours to a book, like, it's a lot.
Yeah,
It's a
and only
lot.
so much speed change you can do, right?
Yeah.
Without it
Uh,
compromising your experience.
I think about this sometimes, how much of a time commitment an audiobook is,
Oh,
because
so
if you watch a
much.
season of a TV show, it's probably what, like 10 episodes, an hour ish each. That's 10 hours. The average audiobook is like 10 to 15 hours.
Yeah,
That's a lot.
it
That's a
is.
lot.
Oh, it's a lot.
Yeah.
Even if you're doing other things, even if it's a multitasking situation, it's just a lot out of your day, out of your week that you're spending on this particular form of, I don't know, engagement, right?
That's why when somebody tells me, "Oh, I'm a huge bookworm," I'm like, "Okay, this person dedicates a lot of time to this." Very
Yeah,
clearly.
no, for sure.
Okay,
Okay,
I'd
so
like to tell you my
yes, go.
ranking, okay?
Hmm.
Okay. Number 1, plot. Number 2, characters. Number 3, writing, and number 4, setting.
Mm.
What do you analyze from my ranking?
Well, obviously, I heard you when you said number 3, writing. Um, but you put setting last as well.
Yeah, I put setting last too because ultimately the setting doesn't really shape a story that much, right? If a book is good, in my opinion, it's the characters that drive the story.
Yeah, like you can write a book placed anywhere. You can write a book that takes place in a room called room, and the entire thing is that's the setting. You're not really focusing on it. You're just kind of letting yourself or letting people know this is where it's happening. I mean,
Mhm.
it could setting could really drive a plot though, and drive us into the minds of characters. So I do think we're underestimating the power of setting, at least in our
And
ranks.
I'm a big fantasy fan, and
Yep.
fantasy's all about setting. So
Oh
you
yeah,
might
it's
think that I
so
would
true.
want to put setting last, right? Setting very high up, right? I don't
World
care
building.
if it's an amazing world with like fantastic world building. Well, like, I want to read a story. I'm not there for the world. I'm there for the story.
Hmm. But then there's worlds built around worlds, and you'd think, okay, yeah, setting is what made this happen, like the um, Harry Potter series, right? Hogwarts and all of the elements that just was setting that now we can immerse ourselves in real life, like at Universal Studios or whatever, because it's built around this place in fantasy.
Mm. Now, what we wanted to do was to each of us give an example of a book or a series that is very representative of one of these elements that
Yep.
particularly excels in one of these elements. And I'd say Harry Potter is excellent in terms of setting.
Hmm.
Everybody wants to read Harry Potter to feel like they're being transported to Hogwarts. It's magical. It's something that
Yep.
we can all remember, and you can feel like you can really picture the hallways and the classrooms and the dormitories in Hogwarts. It's so vivid, and you just want to be there. And sometimes you kind of forget that there's a story wrapped around it.
Exactly. No, seriously, like in our uh, there's this nostalgia or deja vu or just cozy feeling that comes with reading the Harry Potter series when you move from one book to the other, where you go, oh, we're back there again. Like, we're back on the train. We're back at Ron Weasley's house. We're back at Hogwarts. J.K. Rowling just does an incredible job painting. She does that so well that the setting really does transport you.
And listen, we both put it as the fourth most important element. That doesn't
Yes.
mean it's not important. All of
No.
these things really contribute to enjoyment. It's just we had to make a ranking for the sake of conversation.
Yeah. And I think it's true that we take some of these elements as givens, right? Or, we'll get into that as we read through some of these responses we had from the book club. But for
hmm
me, setting was always kind of like, yeah, it's the background thing. Of course we're set where we are. But then you think about books like I already mentioned Room, but Girl on the Train by Paula Hawkins, which is a book that I recently read,
hmm
where you're following this woman around on the train, essentially, for most of the book. That's what you're getting. So the setting gives you an ideal place to get into the minds of the characters and get to know her personalities, her story. But this particular setting is what puts you in that space to kind of
hmm
focus in on something else. And I thought that was interesting, or it's interesting when books are written that way.
What is a book that, in your opinion, really exemplifies excellent plotting?
I couldn't pick just one. I feel like you need
Okay,
to go
let's hear it.
first on this because plot is your top.
Okay, I'll oblige.
Okay.
The Wheel of Time series by Robert Jordan. Okay,
Ooh.
so this book, the series is 14 books long, with the average length being like 30 hours each. So there better be plot in this thing. And is there ever? There's a ton of characters and there's always something happening. It's a series that I'd say really earns its length. It's not long for nothing. And it doesn't when you're reading one of the books, it doesn't feel long because it really actually has a surprisingly fast pace.
Hmm.
hmm
Now, does it stand out for plot for you, or is it just something that even when you think back at the series, the plot was just done so well that you hold up plot to such a high standard?
Something that big Wheel of Time fans will say is that the Wheel of Time series, you're gonna laugh at this, is
Hmm.
even better on second read.
Get out. Why?
yeah,
Because you're familiar now, or what?
because you're familiar, and Robert Jordan is amazing at plotting and foreshadowing and planning ahead. So, for
So now
example,
you're like in the know about it, which
yes,
makes it even
exactly, and you
more
you can see
digest.
things happening in the background.
Yes, yes.
And one of the things that he does is, for example, in the prologue of book 3, it sets up the climax of book 6.
Whoa.
And all of these, like, you
Oh,
get
he thought that far
answers,
ahead.
yeah, that far ahead, and you get payoffs in like reveals for mysteries that were established like 4 books previous, to the point where you forgot it was even a mystery. And like something gets revealed, you're like, oh, that's why that happened that way 4 books ago. And it's super satisfying. And when you reread the series a second time, everything just clicks into place and you just can really appreciate how Robert Jordan like planned everything. And this is something I find when you're listening to a book that's well plotted is you feel like you're in good hands. It doesn't feel like an
Hmm.
author just winging it. You can trust that this is going somewhere and this is building to something.
Okay. That's interesting. So is the opposite of that trying to predict what's going on or things that are taking too long to get somewhere? Because you mentioned this with Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, right? Where you're like, wow, this went on for 16 hours before something happened. I'm paraphrasing. But that idea of like, where is this going? I don't know if you know where this is going, kind of thing.
It feels like sometimes the authors are just having fun with it and they're just trying to set up a mood. And I don't know. I'm not cool with that. It just bores me, but that's a personal preference.
Right, right. Well, we're talking about personal preferences. That's fair. Okay,
Mhm.
and then I wanted to ask you as well. How high does the climax have to be for it to affect your ranking of the plot or your rating of a plot in a story? So what I'm saying is,
Highly. That's a really good point. So
yeah.
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. That's what I was going to ask you. Like, does it have to build up and the cranking of what's about to happen? Does it have to be crazy good for you to feel like it hit the spot where plot needs to get for it to be a really good plot?
Yeah, for a plot to be solid and engaging to me, it has to work as a whole from start to finish. Right, because if it doesn't have a good ending, then the entire thing collapses.
Mm,
It has to be built like a pyramid, right? Solid, like
yes.
solid foundation, and then has an apex that's like held up by everything that happened before it.
And does it have to be unpredictable? Like, if you can tell
Mm.
where the plot is going and it's not necessarily a twist right at that point, is that disappointing?
You're asking me, but like, do you not care about plot? I don't understand.
The thing is, I don't rank it so high. Like, I'm
Mm.
surprised if I'm surprised. If I can kind of follow, like, oh, I think this is what's going to happen, especially when we're talking about mysteries, right? So you start like suspecting or wondering if this is what's going on, just trying to fill in the gaps, investigating along with the characters. Uh, I don't mind if I was right, but I'm curious if for people who are really putting plot high up there on a pedestal, if you were able to predict how things are going to pan out, if that does feel disappointing, especially with
I'm
fantasy, because there's so
yeah,
much room to play.
I'm not good at predicting.
Same.
Probably because I don't try. I know some people have a lot of fun with that, trying to predict what's going to happen. I think that a lot of people get a lot of enjoyment out of that.
Yep.
But if something is predictable, it depends to what extent, because there's a difference between incredibly obvious and I have a pretty good idea that this is going to happen. And what's
Mm.
more important to me is how do you get from point A to point B? I don't care what point B is necessarily. It's how
Mm.
you get there that really matters. And
Okay, so
how
it's
you
still about
get
the
there
journey.
is through plot.
Yes. Okay, that's actually a really interesting way of looking at it, because I always
Mhm.
thought of a plot as like caring so much what point B is. But you're talking about it's still the journey, but like take me on it. Can we take this moment to play one of the responses? We got a response from Sarah Hillis uh
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
on the question, and I think that she describes what you're describing really well.
This is a great question. I think that it might even seem really obvious to people if they're not really thinking about it. But when you sit down and actually try to think about this question, it's an interesting one. I really think that for me, character is the most important thing in a fiction book, because you want characters that are well drawn so that you understand what they're doing and why they're doing it. Then it's writing, because I can have a less than perfectly written book with great characters. I'm happy with that. Then I think it's setting, actually, because either like a really well built world or a world that's sparsely enough drawn that I can put my own kind of spin on it. I like either one, actually, but I do like a setting that's well, it's a vivid setting. And then I think the lowest rung on the ladder is plot. Interestingly enough, I'm not a plotter as when I write. I don't sit down and plot every little twist. I let the characters do what they do, and then the plot kind of comes from that. And I think that's the kind of book I like. That it's just the characters are making choices. It's not like, oh look, a handsome stranger walked into town, and that, like, no. I like a plot that proceeds from the characters' choices. So it's the lowest rung on the ladder. Actually, they're all pretty high, of course, but I think for me, a character first, then writing, then setting, and then plot.
Okay, so let's break down all the things that she brought up, right? So starting with character, she said you want characters that are well drawn. And, we can all agree with that. And we'll get into some other responses that talk about character. Writing, less than perfectly written book with good characters. She's down with that. The setting, which was her third ranking, so she was one up us on that.
Okay.
She said a setting that's vivid is helpful for her. And for the plot, which she put last, this is what I find interesting. I don't
Okay,
sit down
Sarah.
and plot every little twist. The characters are making choices. I like a plot that proceeds from the characters' choices. So she's kind of talking about the characters driving the plot and how she's not backseat driving that. A lot of us do, though. Like when we're watching horror movies or investigative things, we are predicting or find it engaging to continue try to predict what's going on.
George R. R. Martin, the author of Song of Ice and Fire, the series that Game of Thrones is based on, had a really awesome bit in one of his interviews where he talks about the different types of authors. He splits them up into two groups, the architects and the gardeners. The architects are the plotters. They're the people who plan out absolutely everything.
Mhm.
They're not exactly sure how they're going to get from point A to point B, but they have the skeleton firmly constructed before they start anything. And the gardeners are the ones that plant the seed and watch it grow. And the gardeners are typically the authors that have really, really fascinating characters because it's the characters that drive the plot. Well, one thing that he says about gardeners is that sometimes his characters surprise him, where
Ooh.
he doesn't tell himself this character is going to do this and then that and then this and then that. He just gets to a certain point of story and tells himself, okay, based on what's happened to this character so far in the story and what I know of his personality, how would they react naturally? And then he goes from there. It's like he doesn't even have a choice in the matter. He
Yes.
planted a seed and then watched it grow. And sometimes he
Yes.
doesn't even know where he found himself.
This is brilliant because I feel like in my, years of reading, Stephen King talks about this as well and does this very, very well. So that's why for characters I picked It by Stephen King, because as much as it is a really, really, really long investment of a book, it is brilliant for character development. And not even just character development, but you just go in and as you learn about the characters, you instantly, at least for me, I instantly start to feel invested in whatever the book has to offer. And it's because the characters feel so real, feel so alive. And in his book on writing, which is kind of a guide to writing, but also like he talks about the way he writes.
Right. I need to get to that one. That one sounds
So good.
amazing. You've mentioned it multiple
Seriously.
times.
It's
I need
short.
to.
It's
Okay.
short. You can
Short?
get through
Okay.
it. But in that book, he talks about that. And in interviews, I've heard him talk about that as well, where like you embody the character so much as you write and it just comes out of you that there is a point where you might feel frustration that the character is going to do this or the character has put themselves in this predicament, but you can't turn back now. Like that's inauthentic. And you may have had different plans for this book, but that's not the way it's working out. And that's just the way it is. And it's so brilliant. You can honestly tell that kind of real, organic process for the gardeners, I guess, as you mentioned in this reference, for people like Stephen King, for authors like Stephen King, who just go with whatever the characters bring into them. Now, I'm not going to mention, maybe offhandedly, that he did talk about his journey on drugs. and the kind of influence that drugs had during his writing process. He was very honest about that. But seriously, like it's such an interesting thing to think about.
What is that makes a good character? Is it all about believability for characters, whether that's bad or good? Like, I'd actually argue that following characters that feel fleshed out and actually human, and the way they react to things and their thoughts on things just feels consistent, and like they actually are an individual. It's not an author manipulating them.
Right.
And a bit of a side note, but it's super frustrating when characters do things out of character because it doesn't.
You don't believe them.
Yeah, because then you're just reading words on paper, and it's like, what are we reading? But I find that celebrity culture is kind of like just following characters, whether they're bad or good, right? For better or for worse, these people are consistent in their actions. And it's kind of fascinating just because they're consistent, things happen to them and then they react to it the way they do. And if it's unpredictable, if they're not consistent, then it's like there's nothing to follow there. It's not interesting. But if a character is consistent in their reactions to things, then it's super engaging. And I think that applies to celebrities and characters in fiction.
It's so true. Like, in a nutshell, if you don't trust that the character is who they are, and you don't trust that, and it's happening through the writing, but essentially you're kind of leaving the author out of it. You're walking alongside the character, and you're, unconsciously just taking in what they're doing, who they are. And that's why some books honestly even feel so short. Like, these new like YA romance titles that are just so short. They're just, you can
Right.
get through 5 books in a month or a
Mhm.
week or two, because they're just meant for these like quick snippets of I don't know, like a glance at this romance or this situation, whatever. And yes, it has like the beginning, middle, and end. But at some point, you're thinking like, it just doesn't feel real enough. Like, it doesn't feel like these characters have gone on this path together or have built this story. It doesn't feel like the author has put in any effort to make us invest. They're kind of giving us like a formula, but not, it doesn't feel real.
You're
Uh,
reading archetypes, not characters.
yes,
That's the
exactly.
difference, right?
Here's a character,
it's
and here's who
formulaic.
he is. Yeah. He's got this, and this about him, and she's got this, and this about her. And oh my gosh, they're on this star-crossed journey
On
together.
the topic of characters, I like to quickly plug an author which I think is amazing at character writing.
Yeah.
Joe Abercrombie, he's a fantasy writer. He typically does like grim dark fantasy, like really a brooding, dark, depressing fantasy. It's a whole genre.
Mm.
His books span multiple points of view from different characters, and it's always first person.
Mm.
And one thing you'll always hear readers of Joe Abercrombie say is that his character voice is amazing, because if you go from one character's chapter point of view, based on like the first sentence, you know automatically who it is just because of the way it's written. It's as if every time you change point of view, it's a new writer. Like you get such an amazing glimpse at the character's psyche just by the internal monologue and the narration happening around them.
One of the responses from the book club was from Ryan Hui. I'm just reading a bit because we're talking about characters.
Mhm.
Is he ranked characters first? First of all, he went into a bunch of stuff about narration, but he's talking about loving to hate characters. The ones that get under your skin are the best, and these anti-heroes as well. Does that speak to the opposite point of trusting a character, or is that just the frustration we have with how complex a character can be and relating to the complexities of being human?
I mean, some humans are pretty vile and despicable. That doesn't mean that their motivations aren't not understandable or explainable, but you can
empathetic?
see where they come from.
Yeah.
You understand their messed up psychology.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
that's the best villains to me are the ones that you're like, I get it. I get it. Like, you're
Yep.
wrong, but I get it.
Yep. And you're saying villains. For me, sometimes that's the hero, right? Like, there are times where we put heroes and protagonists up on pedestals, and then they show us their vulnerable or flawed side, and then we're like, no, how could you? but it's true. Ryan was also talking about narration. A narrator can perform a book so great that it offsets how bad the writing can be. Again, paraphrasing. It turns the tide, he says. So that's just kind of making a distinction between reading in print and listening to an audiobook, because we talked about this over the weekend, Jay. Like, there are memoirs like Born a Crime by Trevor Noah, Son of a Critch by Mark Critch, where people have been turned off the book or just not as engaged and interested because they tried to read it in print. And then if they went to audio next, or if you compare their notes to people who've listened to the audiobooks, the performance is actually so stellar. It brings out the writing. It three-dimensionalizes it.
To give you an example of this, like in Born a Crime by Trevor Noah, he narrates his own book, and he does impressions of his cousins and his friends. And you
Yep.
just know that it's so genuine because he knew these people. He actually knew them. Like, he's really doing an impression.
Yeah.
He's not creating a character. It's incredibly genuine. It's one of my favorite things about that book. His performance is amazing.
Should we go through more responses?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have one here from Danielle McLaughlin. Let me read this one. For me, it's all about the writing. If a book is poorly written, I drop it or launch it across the room. Hope you got a drywaller on speed dial. I enjoy well-developed characters, of course, and the setting can be quite compelling. But if the writing is awful, nothing will save the book for me. And I'm quite fussy, too. There are quite a few badly written books that become popular. Just not with me, I'm afraid.
Yeah, she's really picky and fussy, as she says, but I love that. She actually told me offline that she's read more than a couple stinkers lately from the book club that she's part of, so she's really looking for a good recommend. Also, she's recommended incredible books to us, by the way, over the years. They're There by Tommy Orange.
Okay.
Freaking fascinating book.
Okay.
Indigenous fiction. But
Good
yeah.
recommendations from Danielle McLaughlin. This is actually, when it comes to recommendations, you tend to trust certain people more than others.
Yes.
Right.
But
Yeah,
your
you need to
standards
find
are
the
so
good
high.
tastemakers.
Yeah. And especially if they rank similar to how you rank, like obviously that's why this question is so fascinating to me, because now I feel like just going through the book club responses, I know who I could take recommendations from because they prioritize what I prioritize. Like Danielle's, her on writing. Who did anybody talk about plot as their first rank?
Nobody. It was just me.
It
I'm
was
the only
just
one
you?
that put it first.
Well, okay, here. I have I don't know if you know, but I added this late. I have a response from Raki Kareem, and he says plot and character have to be 1 and 2. And if you have a good plot and good characters, it's a given that the writing is good. I disagree with that completely. And there are some books that have decent enough writing, but the plot and character really makes the story. So I think it's, again, like this understanding that what you're looking for is what makes the book for you. Because if you're not necessarily focusing on the writing, like you're focusing on that plot development and the arc, then that's what you're kind of going for, right? Whereas for me, if the writing, you can talk all about the plot, but if the writing is slow, it's not descriptive enough, you're not giving me much inside the characters' minds or whatever it is, I don't know. It's rushed. There's times where I feel like the writing is just so rushed. Like you're trying to take me somewhere, but I'm like, I'm not ready yet. I don't feel invested.
Okay, well, I think we need to define something here. When you
What?
talk about writing, I think Raki makes a good point that if the plot and the characters are good, then it's a given and the writing is good. I think there is some truth to that. Because
How? What
establishes
what's the
good
given?
plot
What's
and
the
characters?
writing?
Is
your
the
question?
writing just how you describe things? Is the writing just how you describe things? Or is
No.
it how you choose to arrange the elements of a book?
Oh.
Right? Like,
No.
I think writing is a very
Okay.
vague term. And maybe we should have defined it a little bit more because it seems like people have had different
We're going
ideas
through
of what
it
it
in real
actually
time.
is.
All right. Arranging the elements. Like if we think about essay writing kind of thing, like are you making sense with the way that you've
Right. Is your book logical?
sequenced? Yeah.
Are your characters consistent in their actions? Are they believable?
Yes. Are you
That's
flipping
writing,
from
is it
thing to
not?
thing to thing?
Okay.
Yeah, but isn't that really plot? No, you're right. It's not plot. There's this gray area that we're tapping into right now.
Yeah, I think we're realizing now that writing is a bit of an overarching
Yes,
thing. I'm
I'm thinking of style. I'm thinking of writing style. I'm thinking of good writing as...
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah, it's I think people call it prose.
Prose,
right? Just
yeah.
the way an
Yeah.
author writes that makes it distinctively theirs. It's their idiosyncrasies that
Exactly.
can be there for better or for worse.
I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy. She has this very like snippy. How do I even describe the way she writes? It's just
Passive aggressive?
short, yes, but like short sentences, quick, witty thoughts. The chapters that end on just like, whoa, like she doesn't try to nicely wrap things or, make you comfortable. She just kind of writes it as if she was on edge the entire time. And I loved it. There was that bit of angst that I'm sure she was feeling because of the way that she describes different things in the books. And that's the style that she paralleled the writing with. Or
do you think that was something that was done on purpose, or just came out naturally from the author because that's what she was feeling at the time?
Well, fair question, or fair distinction. I think it naturally came to her, but she obviously went with it as a choice.
And was it enjoyable? Because that sounds like it can be quite abrasive.
It was abrasive, but I enjoyed it because it also worked with it's the pacing that's abrasive, but it worked with how long the book was, the kind of content that we were digging into. It was quite meaningful. And I think if it was written in another way, it wouldn't have hit as hard as it did. So that's what I'm talking about when it comes to writing.
So we gave everyone 4 elements to rank, but I think it's pretty fair to say that there are more things that contribute to the enjoyment of a book.
Yep.
Ryan having hit on one that's really important. There's the narration. This is an audiobook show. So obviously that it's a big one. But I'd argue that also this is something we touched on last episode, is your expectations going into a book. If you're expecting this to be a slow burn and it's just like rapid fire, like you weren't prepared for that. And sometimes it can take you off guard, or if you're expecting a book with a bunch of twists and turns and unpredictability and it's more of a slow burn, like it can be off-putting a little bit.
Yes.
Also, genre-specific elements. For example, if you're reading a horror, you're expecting to feel the heebie-jeebies a little bit. Like you want to be scared, right? If you're reading a mystery, you want to have something to decipher. You want to have something to have to work through. You want to work your brain a little bit, right? Another thing is relatability. If it's something that is kind of niche, like it might mean nothing to other people, but to you, because it's something you've lived through, it really speaks to you because of your personal experience. And also just personal niche interests. Like if you're really into baseball, you're going to like books about baseball. That's simple. Like there's a lot of things that can contribute to the enjoyment of a book that are outside of the 4 elements that we gave you.
Yeah. No, this is really good. And I think that we can wrap here and maybe go through some other things later on. But honestly, we touched on so much that I think makes me understand my relationship with books a little better. But also, it's interesting that you did it this way, Jacob, when you posed the question where you just kind of chunked out different elements and made it very broad enough so that we can relate to each other on different aspects, but also understand that a book experience can feel so different from person to person, depending on what you're taking in and how you're taking it in.
Right. This kind of served as a bit of it's like a psychotherapy session, trying to get to understand yourself a little better.
It feels like we're getting really good at the psychoanalyzing that we said we hated so much. Okay.
Maybe it's good for something.
It's good for something. It's good for the show. We're going to take a break and come back to talk about Banned Books Week, which is wrapping up today, October 7th. And we're discussing the culture of book banning as it stands today in 2023. There's a lot going on still.
You're listening to AMI Audiobook Review. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to AMI Audiobook Review, the weekly podcast where we chat all things audiobooks. Jacob Szymanski and myself, Ramya Amadan, are hanging out with you for a bit longer. We want to talk about Banned Books Week a little bit. So, October 1st to the 7th was Banned Books Week. If you're listening on the day that this podcast released, and we're at the tail end of it now. And we know that this is still a thing, Jacob, around the world, even around North America, lots of different ways that A, books are still being censored and banned, and B, we're celebrating, the complete opposite. We're celebrating the fact that we have books and have discussions around why censorship is so ugly as well. So there's just so much going on across the spectrum.
The American Library Association documented 1,269 demands to censor library books. That was the highest number since they started doing so more than 20 years ago. Just to give you an idea, like that's a massive uptick.
That's wild.
And the thing is, the books that are being requested to be banned are very different than what they used to be as well. It's always culturally relevant as to like what is problematic at any given time.
Why is it so bad now?
Why is it so bad now? That's a good question. I mean, it always feels like things are the worst that they've ever been at any given time in history.
True.
In a way, like we still are better than we ever have been. Like we're much more
That's
accepting
what I
than we ever
mean.
have been, right?
Yeah.
Although
it feels
right
like we have
now,
more information, more access to information than we ever had. Yeah.
But like right now, the big issue and the big thing that's getting banned right now is LGBTQ content in books.
Yes. Yep.
That's the one thing that's come along with the culture war, especially in the United States, but also here in Canada. Let's not lie to ourselves. It's definitely up front and center, and I think children are really at the forefront of this. It's parents saying, I don't want my kids reading this. It's not like the parents are offended by this, is they don't want their kids reading it.
Yep.
And make that what you will of it.
Yeah, there are lots of like elements like drag queen story hour and such that are very directly correlated to this kind of challenge, right? And at that point we're not even like, we're just outright saying, ban this identity of a person. So it's really something. If even whether you're on the side of it or not, it's really something. And you want to talk about the top 10 reasons why books were banned or challenged by the American Library Association. This was in 2022, or from, what is it, as of 2020?
Yeah, as of 2020. So this was before this whole craze about LGBTQ content in books really started. So to give you an idea, sexual content is at number 1
Still.
at 92%.
Still sexual content?
Yeah, number 1.
I'm just at 92%.
Now, to be clear, when people are putting in requests to ban a book, sometimes they can cite multiple reasons. So that's why
that's fair.
It's 92%.
Well, sexual content will always make the
content. And number 2 is offensive language at 62%.
All right.
Number 3 is unsuited to age group at 49%. So that's children coming into this. 4 is religious viewpoints at 26%. And 5 is LGBTQ content at 23.5%.
I'm actually, because we hear so much in news and literature news about LGBTQ plus content being so badly challenged, I'm a little bit surprised that it's number 5 on this list. People are still offended by all these other things, like when we were talking about Taboo and Catcher in the Rye. Like all these other things are still very offensive to people. All right, carry on.
Do you want to make your best guess of what's at 6, 7, 8, 9, 10?
What did we already talk about? Offensive language? I don't know. All the other things like violence. Okay.
Violence is number 6. That's the next one. There you go. You got it. Wow.
Yep, there you go. What else haven't we covered? Is there more? What are people really pissed about these days?
7, racism, 16.5%.
Okay.
8, illegal use of substances.
Substances. Oh, yeah.
12.5%. Anti-family content at 7%. That seems very...
What does that even mean?
Subjective. Yeah, what does that even mean? Seriously, that could be anything. Political viewpoint at 6.5%. That's for the communists out there.
Oh, was that it? Are we at 10?
Yeah, that's 10.
Oh my God. Wow. I'm just saying, like, what was it? Number 4, the kids, not appropriate for age group.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. That, I think, as you mentioned earlier, is the kind of overarching thing for me. Like, people are always very much like, kids aren't ready for this. Kids aren't ready for that. And kind of withholding literature and information from children. I think that approach is all very concerning altogether. But any of these surprise you particularly, or
I thought
concern you? That is,
violence being as low as it was surprised me. It always goes back to this question of why is it that we're so much more afraid of sex than violence, right? Because one is
yeah,
obviously far worse than the other, but I think that mostly has to do with like the Christian values of the Western world that still
yeah.
kind of permeate to this day, even if like the fervor of that religion isn't quite where it used to be. But I always find it interesting to think about the start of book banning culture, and it goes all the way back to the invention of the printing press back in the 1500s.
Oh yeah.
Because who had the power to disseminate information back in the day? It was the Catholic Church, because they were the ones with all the scribes. They were the people who had the ears of the populace. And when the Gutenberg printing press was invented, suddenly it was the printing houses. They could print whatever they chose, basically. And that information could be disseminated like really, really quickly. And it was right around that time that Pope Paul IV established in 1557 the, oh God, I got to brush up on my Latin, the Index Librorum Prohibitorum, which is a
Oh,
list of books that was banned across Catholic states.
okay. So
All right, that's fine. We can wrap up. It's fine.
no, just I'm just getting over the Latin. So no, it's really kind of crazy to think about, all right? Like, because you mentioned these historical kind of catalysts, I guess, right? Or something that was so widely, I don't know, there, like happening, that it influenced our togetherness on a challenge or challenges of literature. And I think about how something happens, some kind of a revolution or a protest or whatever happens, even just like the changing of technology happens, and then it takes forever for the chaos to die down.
And
Like if we
sometimes the chaos dies down and then just a new problem comes up and it breeds a whole new type of chaos,
exactly.
right? It just ebbs and flows.
It is. It's true. It's ebbs and flows. But I think it's wild to me how the peak and the catalyst can happen so quickly, but then for years to come, we're still going, wow, we're still banning this, or we still
Feeling
think of
those
this as a
shock
challenge.
waves, right?
Yes.
Where
Yes.
sometimes we ban something and then like 30 years later, you just get around to unbanning it. You're like, yeah, I feel like we
Yeah.
need to move on from this issue.
Exactly. But you're right though. Something else will come up, and it's never really an ending thing. I think at some point I naively felt that there's no way that in 2023, this can be the top 3 challenges of a book
Mm-mm.
or of literature, but absolutely not.
Yeah, you
It
would
just
think
goes
that
to
number
show,
one would be like racism and hate speech,
right?
right?
The stuff that we're
That's what I
fighting
would thought would
for.
be number one. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's the stuff that everybody can agree on.
Yeah.
But no, it's still
The
sexual
kinds of things
content.
that we find to be discriminatory, but like no, there's so many kind of deeply rooted, as you said, religious or political affiliations, or just historically. And then also we have to keep in mind that we're talking about this side of the world. We're not even getting into just like internationally how books are treated or literature
Oh,
is treated, or
it's true. It's
rules and
different all over
laws
the
and
world.
culture. Oh
Yeah, it's
yeah.
kind of like during the Cold War and during the wars of like
Mm-hmm.
democracy versus communism, where books that were pro-communist were being banned all over the Western world. But in Russia, all these books that were like
Yeah.
anti-communist
Yeah.
were getting banned. Like it's just the exact opposite. These book banning wars. This ultimately, it's the fight to who gets to disseminate information.
Mm-hmm.
It is about control.
It
It's
is,
about
of
nothing else.
course.
It's all about
It's all
control.
about power and control. And, we see that in the form of parents banding together, or government saying this or that, or, people of power with literature, like people who have the power over literature, to say, no, we can't distribute this, right? Like
And it's
distribution.
not, and I think today it's kind of evolved. It's not just literature that's getting banned. It's
No,
also websites and Wikipedia
everything,
and
any access to
Google and a
information.
whole bunch of countries. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, sometimes it's like next to impossible to access Wikipedia articles in certain countries because the countries or the governments of certain countries don't want that information out there.
The
And
more we
eventually, like, it's
have,
not going to be possible to control the flow of information like
we'll
they
still
used to be
try
able to
though.
do. Oh, they'll still try.
We'll still
They'll try their
try.
best.
Oh,
Ramya,
damn, I
we're
said we and they said they. Oh no.
we're running out of time
Yep.
just about here. What are we talking about next week?
Well, next week we're going to check in with our friends from Sela. Karen and Teresa are going to join us because they always have fun things to say, and we love that they join us at least once a month. Sarah Hillis is also going to give us a bit of a Know Your Narrator, so I'm looking forward to who she's featuring and what we can break down about their performances and prep. And that's it. That's all we have.
That's it? Okay, bye.
Okay, bye. Ramya Amuddin and Jacob Szymanski, hosts of AMI Audiobook Review. We miss technical producer Nisreen Abdel-Majid. I think Jacob's doing her job for the next 2 weeks. But anyways, we'll be back in a week. And until then, happy audiobook listening.